You need to tell a colleague their work just, well, isn't good enough. Or maybe their behavior in meetings is just actively dragging the whole team down.
Brilliant.
Or even harder, they need to change something really fundamental about how they operate, and they need to do it soon. What do you even say?
Right. I mean, it is the exact moment every professional completely dreads. You can almost feel the temperature in the room drop just thinking about it.
Oh, for sure. My heart rate goes up just visualizing that little calendar invite popping up. You know, the one that just says quick chat?
The worst.
Because there is this massive, paralyzing fear that you're either going to be way too harsh and completely blow up the working relationship, or
You're going to be too nice.
exactly, you're going to be so vague, so overly polite that the entire point just gets lost in translation. We spend all this time learning technical skills, but almost zero time learning how to actually talk to each other when things go wrong.
And, looking at the materials we have for this deep dive, the stakes are just incredibly high.
Yeah.
Done poorly, feedback doesn't just create like an awkward 10 minutes in a conference room.
Right.
It crushes morale, it breeds resentment, and it can actively derail a team's progress. But, and we have a really substantial stack of professional curriculum here dedicated to this exact premise, done correctly, feedback is the single most powerful driver of trust and improvement in any organization.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this toolkit for you. We're going to look at the exact structural frameworks and the precise phrasing that professionals use to handle these super uncomfortable conversations. Yeah. We really want to take this dreaded corporate chore and turn it into a mechanism that you can use to elevate your team's performance.
To get there, though, we first have to look at how the human brain actually processes criticism. Because when we hear negative feedback, our amygdala, which is, the brain's threat detection center, it often just fires right up.
It's that fight or flight response.
Exactly. We go straight into defense mode. And to bypass that anxiety, managers historically relied on structural frameworks to organize their thoughts.
Yeah.
And that starts with a really classic method that our sources suggest might actually be doing way more harm than good.
Ah, yes. The famous feedback sandwich?
Just sandwich, yeah.
Positive, then critical, then positive. So you say something nice, you deliver the actual bad news, and then you quickly follow it up with something encouraging so, they don't sprint out of your office in tears.
That is the traditional model,
Yeah.
It was the absolute gold standard for decades.
I have to challenge this right out of the gate, though, because just reading through the materials, the sandwich feels less like a tool for the person receiving it and more like a crutch to make the giver feel less guilty.
Oh, that's interesting.
It reminds me of hiding a bitter pill inside a piece of cheese for a dog. You're just trying to trick them into swallowing the medicine.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the mechanism you're describing is precisely why the curriculum flags as, frankly, fundamentally flawed for everyday use.
Yeah.
Human beings are exceptional pattern recognizers, far better than dogs.
Right. They catch on.
They absolutely catch on. Over time, your team learns the rhythm of the sandwich. They hear that first compliment, and instead of feeling appreciated, their brain immediately flags it as a threat cue.
Because they know the cheese is a trap.
Yes, they know the critique is coming. So they completely tune out the positive feedback. It just registers as disingenuous filler. And then, because they're already bracing for impact, the critical feedback often gets lost in the emotional anticipation anyway.
Wow. So it ruins both parts.
Exactly. You've essentially trained your team to dread praise.
Okay, so do we just throw the sandwich out entirely then?
Well, not entirely. The materials do clarify it still has some utility, but we have to restrict it to very specific contexts.
Yeah.
Namely, in highly emotionally sensitive situations or in very new relationships where you haven't really established a baseline of trust yet.
So, if you're dealing with someone who is already incredibly fragile on a given day.
Right. Softening the blow is sometimes necessary just to keep them in the room, psychologically speaking.
Okay, I get that. So keep the sandwich in the emergency glass. Break only in case of extreme sensitivity. But if the brain's pattern recognition ruins the sandwich for our, day-to-day operations, we need a way to deliver a critique that bypasses that threat response entirely.
Right.
How do we communicate clearly without it feeling like an attack?
That brings us to the core framework highlighted in the curriculum. It's an acronym, actually, SBI. Situation, Behavior, Impact.
Situation, Behavior, Impact. Okay, so instead of giving this general sweeping critique, you get intensely, almost painfully specific.
Exactly.
First, you outline the situation, so the exact time and place.
Yeah.
Second, the behavior, the observable action. Third, the impact the tangible effect that behavior had on the project or the team.
And the word observable is really the linchpin here. The behavior must be something a video camera could actually record. It cannot be like a judgment of their internal character or their hidden motivations.
There's a great example in the text to illustrate this. Let's say a colleague keeps talking over a client. Under the old way, you might just sit them down and say, you're too aggressive in meetings.
Right, which is terrible.
Yeah. But using SBI, you change the framing entirely. You say, in Tuesday's meeting, which is the situation,
Right.
when you interrupted the client twice, that's the behavior. It caused the client to pull back, and we lost the thread of the negotiation, the impact.
Just think about the psychological difference between those two approaches. Saying you are aggressive is essentially a character assassination.
Yeah, it hurts.
It does. It tells the person that their fundamental personality is flawed. The immediate involuntary response to that is defensiveness. But saying you interrupted twice is merely a data point. It is entirely factual. It just completely separates the person from the problem.
You're basically just pointing at the tape. It's really hard to argue with a recorded fact.
And by focusing on the impact, we lost the thread of the negotiation, you are showing them why the behavior actually matters. You aren't punishing them for breaking some arbitrary rule. You're pointing out a roadblock to your shared success.
That makes the feedback so objective. But as I was reading through the curriculum, I saw they paired this SBI framework with something called the Ask First coaching approach.
Yes, that's a crucial pairing.
And honestly, I have to say, my first instinct was that Ask First sounded kind of like a trap.
Oh, really? How so?
Like a manager trying to trick an employee into confessing to a mistake before, dropping the hammer. How is this actually supposed to be used without feeling manipulative?
It's a really fair concern, honestly. The Ask First approach just involves asking the person for their perspective before you deliver your feedback. So using that meeting example, you would start by asking, how do you feel that presentation went? The trap you're worried about only happens if the manager treats it like a pop quiz, where they already hold the answer key and they're just waiting for you to fail.
Exactly. If I know they messed up and they know they messed up, asking how do you think it went just feels like making them dig their own grave.
But if applied correctly, the intent isn't a gotcha moment at all. The intent is genuine curiosity about their level of self-awareness. The psychology behind this is actually profound. People are infinitely more receptive to feedback when they feel like they are active participants in the diagnosis.
Okay, that makes sense.
If they say, I felt like I was talking too much and the client tuned out, your whole job changes. You are no longer the harsh critic. You are now a collaborator helping them solve a problem they have already identified.
Oh, I see. They accept the critique because they've essentially given it to themselves first. It creates autonomy.
Exactly. And even if they are completely oblivious, if they say, I thought it went great, you have still given them the respect of the floor. You've gathered data on how they view their own performance, which tells you exactly how far apart your two realities are before you introduce the SBI framework.
Wow, that actually raises a really interesting application for this because, since SBI is so factual, couldn't we use that exact same structure to give better positive feedback too?
Absolutely.
Because one of my biggest pet peeves is when a manager just says, good job or nice work. I mean, it feels empty, it's nice to hear, but it doesn't actually tell me anything about what I did right.
The curriculum is so emphatic about this point. Good job is just not actionable. Positive feedback requires structure just as much as critical feedback does, if not more.
It's more.
Well, think about it. If an employee doesn't know why they succeeded, they cannot replicate that success. They are just guessing at what made you happy.
The source material provides some excellent language for this, actually. Instead of a generic good job, you use the SBI model for praise. You say, I noticed you took the time to reorganize the data structure before the presentation. There's the behavior.
Right.
And it made a massive difference because it saved the engineering team 3 hours of prep work, and there's the impact.
You are transforming a generic compliment into strategic reinforcement. You are essentially giving them a blueprint of their own competence.
I love that. So having a structural framework like SBI is a great foundation, but frameworks are, just theory. When you are actually sitting in the room, the vocabulary you choose can either open a door or completely build a wall.
Very true. Words matter.
The materials focus heavily on the specific phrasing of constructive and developmental feedback.
Yeah, and we really need to define constructive carefully based on how the experts use it here.
Yeah.
In typical corporate speak, constructive often just means, well, polite criticism.
Sugarcoating it.
Right. But the root of the word is literal. It means intended to construct, to build something up. To be truly constructive, feedback must be actionable.
I always think of it like the difference between telling someone they're a terrible driver versus telling them they need to start braking earlier at stop signs.
Yes. That analogy hits the core of it perfectly. Saying, you're a terrible driver is a character attack. It leaves them defensive and totally confused about how to actually fix it. Brake earlier is a mechanical adjustment.
They know exactly what to do with their foot the next time they see a red octagon.
Exactly. And to deliver that mechanical adjustment, the text gives us some very precise framing language to contain what we might call the blast radius of the criticism.
The blast radius, I like that.
A great phrase they suggest is, this isn't about the quality of your work overall. This is about one specific thing I'd like to see change.
That isolation is huge. It stops the employee from spiraling and thinking like their entire career is crumbling over one missed deadline.
You are fencing in the problem. Then we move to developmental feedback, which is entirely growth-focused. It often starts by anchoring the critique to an existing strength.
How does that sound in practice?
Well, like saying, I see a lot of potential in the way you handle clients. I
Yeah.
think there's a great opportunity to build on that strength by also refining your follow-up process.
Oh, I see. You are tying the feedback directly to their personal advancement. But what happens when the power dynamic is flipped? Because delivering feedback upwards to a manager or even sideways to a peer, it requires a completely different touch.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
The stakes shift from performance management to relationship management. The text really emphasizes asking for permission. For upward feedback, a suggested phrase is, I wanted to bring something to your attention and I want to make sure I do it in the right way.
Giving feedback to your boss is basically like trying to adjust the steering wheel from the passenger seat.
Yes.
You have to announce what you are doing and ask permission before you reach over, or they're going to panic and swerve the car into a ditch.
That is a fantastic way to visualize it. You are acknowledging the hierarchy while still asserting the need for a course correction. And for peers, the phrasing is pretty similar. Can I share something with you as a colleague? It defines the boundary before you actually cross it.
But let's look at the friction here for a second. Because you can use the perfect SBI framework, you can ask for permission, you can use all the polished vocabulary, and the person across the table might still completely reject it.
Well, it happens all the time.
Human beings are messy. What do these experts say we do when the conversation goes sideways and the defensive walls just slam down?
Well, when emotion enters the room, the curriculum dictates a hard pivot. The first rule is differentiating between behavioral issues and performance issues. If someone is reacting aggressively or, deflecting blame, you explicitly separate the two.
How so?
You use phrasing like, this is a conversation about how you collaborate with the team, not about your sales numbers.
Ah, because high performers love to use their results as a shield for their toxic behavior.
They really do.
Yeah.
And you have to gently but firmly remove that shield. However, if the defensiveness comes from a place of genuine hurt, because, let's face it, being told you are falling short is painful, the materials advise a technique of de-escalation.
Like giving them space. Take a moment if you need to. I'm not in a hurry.
Exactly.
Or maybe reiterating the intent behind the meeting. Like, I want you to know this comes from a place of wanting to help you succeed, not from a desire to just criticize.
The crucial insight here is that in moments of really high tension, your immediate goal shifts. You are no longer trying to force the message through. Right.
Okay.
You are trying to preserve the relationship.
Right.
By pausing and asking, how are you feeling about what I've said so far? You pull them out of their internal defensive spiral and invite them back into a shared reality.
Okay, I understand the theory there, but I have to push back on one of the specific de-escalation phrases the curriculum recommends.
Okay, let's hear it.
The text suggests saying, I hear you. I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but I am asking you to consider this perspective. Honestly, saying I'm not saying I'm right feels like yielding power. As a manager, doesn't conceding that point make the feedback seem optional?
It's a really common reservation, but it forces us to define the actual objective of the conversation. I mean, is the goal to prove your dominance and win an argument? Or is the goal to permanently change a behavior?
Well, to change the behavior, obviously.
And psychological studies consistently show that people rarely change their behavior when they feel defeated, cornered, or steamrolled. By conceding that you do not possess perfect omniscient visibility into the situation, by saying, I'm not saying I'm 100% right, you immediately lower their defenses.
Because you aren't backing them into a corner anymore.
Right. You are acknowledging their lived experience.
Yeah.
You are essentially saying, you may have experienced that meeting differently, and that is valid, but I really need you to understand how it looked from my side. It transforms a dictated mandate into a negotiation of perspectives. You sacrifice a tiny bit of managerial ego to achieve the actual outcome you need.
Okay, I can see how that plays out in a standard office. But that entire de-escalation process assumes you both share the same baseline for what constitutes a, polite negotiation.
Ah, yes.
In the materials covering the global office, we see that those baselines vary wildly depending on cultural background.
This is perhaps the most nuanced section of the curriculum. For international teams, mastering SBI just isn't enough. You have to calibrate your delivery to the cultural context of the recipient.
Calibrate, like adjusting the dial on your directness. The breakdown of international styles is just fascinating. Take the American style, for instance. Americans value direct, actionable feedback, but they expect it to be wrapped in this heavy layer of enthusiasm. They want a coach, but they also kind of want a cheerleader.
Contrast that with the British professional style, which relies heavily on understatement and indirectness. Negative feedback is often severely softened to maintain politeness.
Give me an example of that.
Well, an American manager might say, this proposal is unworkable. We need a total rewrite. A British manager might look at the exact same proposal and say, this is quite good, though perhaps we could look at adjusting the core premise.
Which creates massive friction. To an American ear, quite good, though perhaps, sounds like a glowing endorsement with just a minor tweak. They might walk out of the room completely missing the fact that they were just told to start over from scratch.
Oh, completely. And then we move to the Dutch or German style, which operates on the total opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah. The materials describe the Dutch approach as intensely direct, entirely factual, and basically devoid of any softening language whatsoever.
But we have to understand why it works for them. In Dutch business culture, clarity is the ultimate form of respect. They operate in relatively flat hierarchies, where hiding the truth behind polite words is seen as patronizing, or worse, a complete waste of everyone's time.
But imagine taking that hyper-direct Dutch approach and applying it to a colleague from one of the Asian professional cultures detailed in the text.
It would be a catastrophic failure of communication.
Right.
The source material emphasizes that in many Asian business cultures, feedback is intricately tied to hierarchy and group harmony. It is almost always delivered privately. Delivering a blunt public critique, even an objective one using the SBI framework, can cause what is known as loss of face.
The stakes for loss of face are incredibly high. It's not just about a bruised ego. In a culture that prizes group cohesion over individual standout performance, public embarrassment actively disrupts the equilibrium of the entire team.
Exactly. A critique that might be seen as bracing but helpful in Amsterdam could permanently sever a working relationship in Tokyo.
Speaking of Tokyo, the Japanese context mentioned in the sources highlights how deeply coded language can be. Apparently, the phrase, that's a little difficult, is often a professional secret code for absolutely not, or this is a massive problem.
Yes.
If a Japanese colleague says your timeline is a little difficult, they aren't asking for a 3-day extension. They're politely informing you that the building is on fire.
It perfectly illustrates why calibration isn't optional. It's a core competency. If you are too direct with an indirect culture, you are perceived as an aggressor. If you are too soft with a direct culture, you are perceived as indecisive or unclear.
The universal principles remain constant, though.
Yes.
Yes.
Be specific, focus on behavior, genuinely care for their development. That all stays the same. But the volume dial must be adjusted.
Okay, so we've covered the structural frameworks, the vocabulary, the emotional de-escalation, and the cultural calibration. Let's see how this all comes together. The curriculum provides a full walkthrough of a high-stakes scenario between a manager named Morgan and a team member named Taylor.
All right, let's break this down. Morgan needs to address a recurring issue. Taylor has this habit of interrupting clients during project updates.
The scenario starts, and Morgan immediately deploys the ask-first approach to test Taylor's self-awareness. Morgan asks, I want to chat about the update. How do you feel it went?
And Taylor, who seems genuinely oblivious to the habit, replies, I thought it went pretty well. The client seemed happy with the timeline.
So Morgan knows they aren't on the same page at all. Here is where the SBI framework gets applied. Morgan doesn't say, you're a bad listener. Morgan says, They were happy with the timeline, but here's a specific thing I want to flag. At 2 points in the meeting, there is the situation.
Yep.
You spoke over their question before they had finished asking it. The behavior. I could see them hesitate and pull back. The impact.
Notice the surgical precision there. There are no assumptions made about Taylor's internal motivations, just the observable reality of the interaction and its direct effect on the client.
And the text notes an immediate emotional pivot here. Taylor is totally caught off guard. Taylor says, "Oh, I didn't realize I did that."
That "oh" is the critical moment of vulnerability.
Yeah.
In a poorly handled conversation, this is exactly the moment where the employee feels attacked and throws up those defensive walls.
But Morgan masterfully navigates it by validating Taylor's intent. Morgan says, "That's exactly why I'm bringing it up. I know it wasn't intentional, but it did affect the dynamic." Morgan assumes good intent while still holding Taylor firmly accountable for the impact.
And then, crucially, Morgan provides the actionable, constructive solution. What I'd suggest is, when a client starts talking, force yourself to pause a beat longer than you think you need to before answering.
And the way Morgan frames the entire critique at the end is just brilliant. Morgan says, "You handle clients really well overall. This is a refinement, not a problem."
A refinement, not a problem.
That is such a powerful phrase. I am literally writing that down. Think about the mechanics of that phrase. It completely neutralizes the threat response. It tells Taylor that their job is safe, their overall competence is recognized, and they just need to turn the dial one notch to the left.
Right.
Taylor accepts the feedback gracefully, and the relationship is not only preserved, it's probably strengthened.
Because the entire structure of Morgan's delivery proved that the goal wasn't punishment. The goal was Taylor's continued success.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just distill these universal principles for you. First, retire the feedback sandwich for your daily interactions. It just triggers pattern recognition anxiety.
Absolutely.
Second, lean on the SBI framework situation, behavior impact, to keep your critiques factual, observable, and completely separate from character judgments.
Third, utilize the ask-first approach to foster autonomy and assess self-awareness before you dive in.
Yeah.
And remember to actively calibrate your delivery to the cultural context of the room.
Right.
Differentiate between behavior and performance, and ensure your feedback is always actionable.
These aren't just abstract theories. You can walk into your very next one-on-one and use the SBI structure to deliver meaningful praise, or, use ask first to open a dialogue about a struggling project. It takes conscious practice, but it fundamentally shifts the dynamics of a team.
Before we conclude, consider this. We have spent this whole time examining how to structure our words to manage the recipient's reaction. But feedback is a two-way mirror.
Oh, how so?
Well, if the way we deliver critique is ultimately a reflection of our own emotional regulation, our own clarity, and our own empathy, what does your default feedback style reveal about you before the other person even has a chance to respond?